The second time Audrey Hart handed me the engagement cancellation papers, I did not beg. That was the first difference. In my first life, I had stood in the center of the Hart family ballroom with everyone watching, my fingers clenched so hard around the papers that the corners wrinkled. I had looked at Audrey in her pale champagne dress, at the diamond necklace on her throat, at the polite pity in her parents' eyes, and at Cameron Blake standing beside her like he had already won. Then I had done the most humiliating thing a man could do. I asked why, I asked whether I had done something wrong, I asked whether the childhood engagement meant nothing to her, I asked whether 3 years of being beside her, helping her family, protecting her reputation, solving her problems, and waiting for her to finally choose me had all been a joke. Audrey had cried then, softly, beautifully, publicly. She said, "Ethan, please don't make this harder than it has to be," and the whole room looked at me like I was the one being cruel. In that life, I refused to sign. I chased her, I helped the Hart family through their financial crisis, I used resources I should never have exposed, I delayed my return to the Sterling family because I thought love meant staying where I was needed. By the time I finally understood that Audrey had never loved me, only the convenience I provided, it was too late. Cameron used the Hart family to reach higher circles. Audrey used my loyalty until it became embarrassing. The Sterling board lost patience, my grandfather died disappointed, and I ended my first life watching the empire that should have been mine pass into the hands of cousins who had waited years for me to choose weakness over inheritance. Then a car crash on a rainy highway ended everything. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the Hart family ballroom, back in the white marble hall, back under the crystal chandeliers, back to the night Audrey broke our childhood engagement. Only this time, I remembered every word before she said it. Audrey stood 3 steps in front of me. She was 22, beautiful in the polished way rich families trained their daughters to be beautiful. Her dark hair was swept over one shoulder, her makeup was soft enough to look natural, expensive enough not to be. She held the folder with both hands, fingers pale around the edges. Around us stood both families' guests, old money, new money, lawyers, board members, people who knew how to smile while calculating damage. My mother had died when I was young. My father had disappeared from public life years ago after a family conflict no one outside the Sterling circle understood. To the Harts and most people in this room, I was Ethan Miller, an ordinary young man raised on the edges of wealth, protected by an old promise between families, but not powerful enough to matter on my own. That was what Audrey believed. That was what Cameron Blake had convinced her to believe. Cameron stood at her right, navy suit, silver watch, easy smile. The heir of a flashy new money investment family whose real balance sheet was already bleeding behind closed doors. In my first life, I had been too focused on Audrey to notice the hunger in his eyes. Now I saw it clearly. He was not here because he loved her, he was here because he wanted the Hart separated from me before anyone realized what my real name could open. Audrey took a breath. Ethan. Her voice trembled at the perfect volume, not enough to seem dramatic, enough to make people sympathize. "We need to talk about the engagement." A few guests looked away with the practiced politeness of people determined to hear everything. I looked at the folder. "Go on." Audrey seemed thrown off by my calmness. In my first life, my face had changed immediately. Fear, confusion, panic. She had seen all of it and softened her expression accordingly. This time, I gave her nothing. She swallowed. "Our families made this arrangement when we were children. We didn't choose it. We grew up with it hanging over us, and for a long time, I thought maybe that meant something." Cameron lowered his gaze, hiding a smile. Audrey continued, "But we're adults now, we have to be honest about who we are and what we want." I said nothing. Her eyes reddened. "Ethan, I don't want to be tied to a childhood promise just because our grandparents were close." There it was, a childhood promise. That was what she called it now. Not when she needed my help, not when her father's company needed quiet introductions, not when she needed someone to stabilize her student foundation after Cameron mismanaged a donor event, not when rumors threatened her reputation and I spent 2 days burying them before they reached the wrong people. Then it was, "Our families have history." Then it was, "You understand me better than anyone." Then it was, "You're the only person I can trust." Now, in front of a room full of witnesses, it was merely a childhood promise. She opened the folder and held out the papers, a formal mutual release from the family engagement agreement, not legally binding as a marriage contract. Of course, this was America, not a medieval estate ledger, but among families like the Harts, signed documents mattered less than public meaning. Signing meant one thing: the Hart family no longer intended to honor the old alliance, Audrey no longer intended to stand beside me, and the people in the room were invited to witness my rejection. Cameron stepped forward half a pace. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "Audrey is trying to handle this respectfully, don't make it ugly." In my first life, that sentence had destroyed me, because everyone heard it as maturity. I heard it now as staging. I looked at him. Did I say anything? His smile faltered. "No, I'm just saying." "Then don't." The room sharpened. Audrey looked stunned. Cameron's jaw tightened. I turned back to Audrey. "Is this what you want?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "Yes, not your parents." Her father shifted uncomfortably near the fireplace. Audrey's mother looked down at her champagne glass. "Not Cameron?" I asked. Cameron's face darkened. Audrey lifted her chin. "This is my decision." Good, a clean answer that would matter later. I held out my hand. "Pen." The room went still. Audrey blinked. "What, you want to cancel the engagement? Give me the pen." Her expression changed so quickly I almost smiled. She had prepared for pleading, for anger, for pain. For me to ask how she could do this after everything. She had not prepared for agreement. Her hand hesitated. Cameron recovered first and took a pen from the folder. He handed it to me with a thin smile. "Smart choice." I looked at him. "No, just final." Then I signed Ethan Miller, the public name I had used since childhood, the name Audrey believed was all I had. The pen moved smoothly across the paper. No shaking, no hesitation, no performance. When I finished, I closed the folder and handed it back to Audrey. "Done." She stared at the signature. Something like panic flickered in her eyes. "Ethan, I didn't mean, you meant to end it." "Yes, but, it's ended." Silence. Someone's glass clinked softly against a tray. Cameron cleared his throat. "At least this can end with dignity." I looked at him. "Careful, Cameron, dignity is expensive when you have to borrow it." His smile vanished. Audrey whispered, "Ethan." I turned to her one last time. "In my first life," I almost said. "Instead," I said, "I hope you get the future you chose." Then I walked out of the ballroom. No one stopped me. They were too stunned. Outside, the cold night air hit my face. For the first time since waking back into this life, I could breathe. The Hart mansion glowed behind me, all glass and marble and curated legacy. I looked at it once, then took out my phone. There was a number I had refused to call in my first life until too late. My grandfather's private line. Richard Sterling, chairman of Sterling Global, one of the richest men in the country, and the man who had waited years for me to stop dragging the Sterling name behind a woman who thought I was beneath her. The call connected after 2 rings. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then an old, steady voice said, "Ethan." I closed my eyes. In my first life, I had heard that voice weak from a hospital bed. This time, it was still strong. "Grandfather," I said. A pause. "You never call this number unless something has ended." I looked back at the Hart mansion. "Yes, the Hart girl. She canceled the engagement tonight." "And you?" I signed. Silence. Then, slowly, my grandfather laughed. Not loudly, not kindly either, like a man hearing a locked door finally open. "Did you beg?" "No." "Did you explain yourself?" "No." "Did you tell them who you are?" "No." "Good." The word settled deep. "Good." My throat tightened. "I'm done delaying the succession." Another pause, this one longer. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Say that clearly." I straightened. "I'm ready to come back. The Sterling Group, the inheritance, the board trial, everything. I'll take it." For a few seconds, there was only the sound of winter wind through the driveway trees. Then my grandfather said, "Come to headquarters tomorrow morning." "I will." "Ethan." "Yes, you finally understand something important." "What?" "Before inheriting the Sterling Empire, you had to inherit your own dignity." The line went dead. I stood alone under the dark sky, the broken engagement behind me and a billion-dollar future ahead. In my first life, I thought losing Audrey meant losing everything. This time, signing those papers felt like getting my life back. Audrey thought I was pretending. That became obvious by noon the next day. My phone began vibrating before I even reached Sterling Global headquarters. "Audrey, I didn't expect you to leave like that." "Then, can we talk calmly?" "Then, you embarrassed me in front of everyone." That one made me smile. I was in the back seat of a black company car my grandfather had sent before sunrise. The city moved beyond the tinted window, towers catching morning light, traffic sliding through Manhattan like polished steel. "You embarrassed me." In her world, My agreement had become an attack. She had wanted to reject me gracefully, she had wanted me wounded but manageable, she had wanted me to leave the room as proof of her kindness, not as proof that I had accepted the end before she was ready to lose control of the story. Audrey sent another message. I know you're upset, but this doesn't have to change everything between us. I looked at the words for a long moment, then I turned off my phone. It had already changed everything. Sterling Global Headquarters occupied an entire glass tower on Madison Avenue, though the company's real holdings stretched through infrastructure, energy, logistics, private equity, medical technology, and real estate across 3 continents. To the public, Sterling was a corporate giant run by an aging titan and a board full of merciless professionals. To me, it had once been a mountain I avoided climbing because Audrey was standing in a garden below, asking me to stay. The car stopped at the private entrance. A security director opened the door. Mr. Miller. I stepped out. He paused only half a second before correcting himself. Mr. Sterling. There it was, the name I had spent years keeping buried. Ethan Sterling, not Miller. My mother's surname had protected me. My grandfather's name would now define me. I walked through private security, past marble walls and silent elevators, up to the executive floor where men and women in tailored suits moved with the controlled urgency of people whose calendar invitations could shift markets. My grandfather was waiting in his office. Richard Sterling was 78 years old, tall, even-seated, white-haired, hawk-eyed, and built from the old American tradition of men who believed sentiment was acceptable only when converted into trusts, scholarships, or architectural wings. He stood when I entered. That alone told me how much the moment meant. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You look less stupid than last time I saw you." I almost laughed. "Good morning to you too." He studied my face. "You signed?" "Yes." "No conditions?" "No dramatic speech." "Not much." His mouth twitched. "Progress." I sat across from him. On the desk lay a stack of documents: succession structure, voting rights, trust activation, executive apprenticeship, board review, Sterling family office authority transfer. The inheritance was not as simple as becoming rich. That was something people outside families like ours never understood. Great wealth was not a suitcase of cash waiting at the end of a hallway. It was control, obligation, leverage, risk, enemies, taxes, governance, and 1,000 people waiting to see whether the heir had enough spine to hold what others wanted to take. In my first life, I hesitated, for Audrey, for the hearts, for the fantasy that if I stayed ordinary enough, she would love me without being intimidated by my real identity. That fantasy cost me nearly everything. My grandfather slid the top file toward me. "The board meets in 48 hours. I can announce you as entering the formal succession track then. Do it." His eyes narrowed slightly. "In your first call after the Hart girl's decision, you are very decisive." "I should have been decisive years ago." "Yes, no comfort, just agreement." He tapped the file. "You will start with internal review, asset exposure, executive rotation, risk committee, Manda observation, then strategic control. No ceremonial prints." "Nonsense. You work." "I expect to. If you embarrass me, I will cut you out with more efficiency than the Hart girl used." "I know." "Good." There was that word again. He leaned back. "Tell me what you know." "About what?" "The Harts." I was silent for a second, then I said, "Their liquidity position is weaker than they show. Hart Biotech delayed 2 vendor payments last quarter. Their charity foundation has been covering social visibility while operational cash tightens. They need a strategic investor within 6 months." My grandfather's gaze sharpened. "And Blake Capital, worse. Cameron's family is over-leveraged. Their real estate fund is exposed. They need access to the Hart network, but the Hart family doesn't have enough cash to save them." Cameron pushed Audrey to cancel the engagement so he could present himself as her stronger option before either family's weakness became visible. My grandfather was quiet, then he said, "You knew all this and still considered marrying her." Shame moved through me. Yes. His eyes were cold. "Love is not blindness. Blindness is blindness. I know that now." "Do you?" "Yes." He watched me long enough to decide whether that was true, then he nodded once. "We will not punish the Harts for their daughter's stupidity." I looked at him. He continued, "But we will also not subsidize it. That's all I want." "No, it is not." I held his gaze. He was right. A part of me wanted Audrey to see, not because I wanted her back, because the wound needed witness. My grandfather understood. He said, "Let the market tell her, not you." That was excellent advice, hard advice, but excellent. At lunch, while I was reviewing internal documents with the chief legal officer. Audrey called, I did not answer, then her father called, I did answer that one, Mr. Hart, a pause, Ethan, thank you for taking my call. His tone had changed since last night, not because he knew yet, because he had spent the morning realizing I had not reacted like a desperate boy. People in business fear calm more than anger, I wanted to say. He continued, that last night was difficult for everyone. Yes, Audrey should perhaps have handled it privately, she chose not to. Another pause, emotions were high. No, the papers were prepared. Silence, then he cleared his throat. Of course, I looked through the glass wall at Manhattan below. Is there anything else? He hesitated. Our families have history. Whatever happens between you and Audrey, I hope there remains goodwill. In my first life, would have heard a plea for affection. This time, I heard a request to preserve access. I said, the engagement is cancelled. Any future relationship between our families will be commercial, not personal. His voice tightened. Commercial, yes, Ethan, that sounds rather cold. It is precise. I ended the call. Across the table, the chief legal officer, Margaret Vale, looked at me with something like approval. Your grandfather will enjoy hearing that. I'm not doing it for his enjoyment. No, she said, that is why he will enjoy it. By evening, the Sterling internal notice was ready, not public yet, just enough to move through the executive network. Ethan Sterling, grandson of Richard Sterling, will enter the formal succession track effective immediately. It hit inboxes at 6:00 p.m. At 6:07, Audrey called again. At 6:09, her father called twice. At 6:14, Cameron Blake sent a message. Cameron heard some strange rumors. We should talk, man. Last night got emotional. No hard feelings, no hard feelings. I laughed once. Grandfather looked up from his desk. What? I handed him the phone. He read the message and gave it back. Blake, men always become friendly when money enters the room. Did you know his grandfather? Yes, borrowed confidence at high interest. That was the most sterling description imaginable. Audrey's message came next. Audrey, Ethan, why are people saying you're connected to Sterling Global? Then please answer me. Then, did you hide this from me? I looked at the last line. Did you hide this from me? Not, I'm sorry. Not, I misjudged you. Not, I treated you unfairly. Her first instinct was still to make my silence an offense against her. I put the phone face down. Grandfather watched me. Do you want to answer? No. Why? Because if she needed the Sterling name to reconsider, she never respected Ethan Miller. For the first time that day, my grandfather smiled fully. There he is. Audrey saw me again 3 days later. Not because I agreed to meet her, because Hart Biotech walked into Sterling Tower begging for capital. The timing was almost poetic. In my first life, I had quietly introduced Hart Biotech to 2 private lenders, softened due diligence concerns, and helped them survive long enough for Audrey's family to regain social standing. Audrey never knew the full extent. Her father did. He thanked me privately, then still sat silent while his daughter humiliated me. This time, I did nothing. No calls, no introductions, no quiet protection. So the Harts came to Sterling Global through the front door like everyone else. Their meeting was originally scheduled with the Strategic Investment Division. My grandfather moved it to the executive conference room. Then he told me to attend. Is that necessary? I asked. No, he said. Useful, for business, for education. Whose? He smiled. Yes. Audrey arrived with her father, Robert Hart, and their CFO. She wore a cream suit and carried a leather folder. Her face was composed, but she looked tired in a way makeup could not cover. When she entered the lobby, she was still Audrey Hart, society daughter, former campus star, beautiful enough to make reception staff glance twice. By the time she reached the executive floor, the scale of Sterling had begun to work on her. Private elevator, security escort, walls lined with acquisitions that had changed industries, assistants who did not need to be impressed because they had already seen presidents, founders, ministers, billionaires, and bankrupt men pretending not to panic. Audrey's confidence dimmed. With each step, I watched through the glass wall of the conference room as she approached. She did not know I was inside. Her father did. I saw it in his face. He had learned enough in the past 72 hours to understand the scope of his mistake. The door opened. Robert Hart entered first, then Audrey, then their CFO. The Sterling executive stood. Not for Robert Hart, for me, Mr. Sterling, Margaret Vale said. Audrey froze. Her eyes found me at the head of the conference table, dressed in a dark suit. Sterling file open in front of me. For a moment, she looked like the world had tilted. Ethan, I nodded. MS. Hart, not Audrey. MS. Hart. She flinched. Robert Hart recovered with the speed of a man who had survived decades of business lunches. Ethan, or should I say Mr. Sterling, today, Mr. Sterling is appropriate. His face tightened. I gestured to the chairs. Please sit, we have 30 minutes. Audrey did not move until her father touched her elbow. She sat across from me. I opened the Hart Biotech file. Numbers do not care about heartbreak. That was one of the reasons I had come to love them. Revenue projection, debt load, clinical delays, vendor stress, overstated partnership pipeline, unrealistic valuation. The company was not dead, but it was not healthy. Robert Hart began his pitch. He spoke well. He always had. Hart Biotech was entering a transitional phase. Temporary liquidity constraints, valuable intellectual property, strong market potential, strategic partnership opportunity. I listened, then I asked questions. Why did vendor payments slip in Q2? Their CFO swallowed. Timing mismatch. Between what? Receivables and operational obligations. So cash. A pause. Yes. I turned a page. Your valuation assumes regulatory progress that has not occurred, Robert said. We are optimistic. Optimism is not collateral. Audrey's eyes lowered. I continued. Your foundation spending has remained high despite operational pressure. Why? Robert stiffened. Our philanthropic commitments are part of our public mission. They are also part of your family's social positioning. Silence. Margaret Vale's pen stopped for half a second. Robert's face flushed. Audrey whispered, Ethan. I looked at her. This is a business review. If you have something relevant to the proposal, say it. She went pale. In my first life, I would have protected her from that tone. Now I used it because it was accurate. Robert cleared his throat. We are willing to discuss favorable terms. Given the relationship between our families, there is no current relationship between our families. The words landed heavily. Robert's mouth tightened. The engagement matter was personal. No, it was witnessed by half your social circle and formalized by signed release. Audrey's eyes filled. Cameron had not been in that room, but his fingerprints were everywhere. Robert tried another angle. Your grandfather and Audrey's grandfather made that promise with great affection. Yes, I said, and Audrey cancelled it. Audrey looked up sharply. I didn't know. That sentence came too fast. I looked at her. What didn't you know? She swallowed. That you were, that Sterling, that I was worth keeping. Her face crumpled. No, I mean, I didn't understand. That is different from not knowing. She had no answer. I turned back to the documents. Sterling Global will not participate in Hart Biotech's current financing round. Robert's face changed. Ethan, Mr. Sterling. His jaw locked. Mr. Sterling, I urge you to reconsider. This decision affects many employees. Yes, that is why I reviewed the numbers carefully. Audrey's voice broke. Are you doing this because of me? I looked at her. There it was, still, even in a conference room, with debt schedules and valuations on the table. She believed the world revolved around her emotional position. No, I said, I'm doing this because the risk is too high and the proposal is weak. She stared at me. I added, if I were doing this because of you, I would have taken the meeting personally. I'm taking it commercially. Margaret Vale looked down to hide the faintest smile. Robert Hart looked like a man watching a bridge burn from both sides. I closed the folder. You are free to approach other investors. Sterling may reconsider in the future if your liquidity position improves, valuation resets, and governance changes are made. Their CFO looked defeated. Robert stood slowly. I see. Audrey did not stand. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Ethan, can we talk privately? No, please, no, I just need 5 minutes. You had years. The room went silent. That one was not commercial. That one was mine. Audrey stood at last. Her hands shook as she gathered her folder. When she reached the door, she turned back. If I had known, I wouldn't have cancelled it. I looked at her. I know. Hope flickered. Then I said, that is exactly why you will never get another chance. She looked as if I had struck her. The door closed behind her. Margaret Vale waited 3 seconds before speaking. Efficient meeting. My grandfather's voice came from the speaker system at the side of the room. He had been listening. Very. I looked toward the speaker. You enjoyed that? Yes, he said, but more importantly, you did not. He was right, had not enjoyed it, not truly. Watching Audrey discover my identity did not heal the first life. It only confirmed what I already knew. She had never seen me. She had seen access only after the door closed. Cameron Blake called me that evening. I let it ring, then I blocked The number, he tried through mutual contacts, then through LinkedIn, then through Audrey. Finally, he had someone from Blake Capital request a meeting with Sterling's investment division. My grandfather forwarded the request to me with one note: educational opportunity. I replied, risk review first. He responded, better. Blake Capital looked impressive from a distance: luxury offices, glossy website, photos of Cameron's father shaking hands with politicians, press releases about bold growth, alternative assets, and visionary real estate development. Debt tells a different story. Debt does not care about lighting. Our analysts pulled the filings: creditor exposure, project delays, bridge loan structure, and off-book guarantees. Within 12 hours, the picture was obvious. Blake Capital was not collapsing yet, but it was leaning over the edge. They needed new liquidity, they needed the heart connection. They needed Audrey to bring social credibility and potential family leverage, and now Audrey had cut herself off from Sterling. Cameron had not rescued her from a poor boy, he had helped her burn a bridge to a fortress. The next week, Cameron appeared at a private investment reception hosted by one of Sterling's partner banks. He saw me across the room and immediately changed direction. I was speaking with a logistics founder and 2 fund managers when Cameron approached with a smile so polished it could have scratched glass. Ethan. I looked at him. Cameron, or should I say Mr. Sterling, you can say nothing if that's easier. One of the fund managers coughed into his drink. Cameron's smile tightened. Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot. No, you showed me your foot very clearly. His eyes hardened. He lowered his voice. Last week was emotional for everyone. Audrey made her choice, but that doesn't mean we all need to be enemies. We are not enemies. Good, we are nothing. The smile disappeared for 1 second. The real Cameron surfaced, angry, entitled, afraid. Then he covered it. I respect your position, he said. Blake Capital has several opportunities that could align with Sterling's infrastructure portfolio. No, he blinked. You haven't reviewed them. I have. That unsettled him. I took a glass of water from a passing tray. Your East Harbor redevelopment is over-leveraged. Your Phoenix mixed-use project missed 2 milestone covenants. Your family office exposure is concentrated in assets you have been marking optimistically. Sterling will not touch that risk. The fund managers went very still. Cameron's face drained. That information is private. It is discoverable by anyone competent. One of the fund managers politely excused himself. The damage was done. Cameron stepped closer. You think you're better than me now because of a name? No, then what? I think you were never as strong as your packaging. His jaw flexed. You hid who you were. Yes, why? To see who respected me without it. Cameron's eyes flashed, and Audrey failed your little test. No, Audrey made her choice. There's a difference. He looked away first. Good, a man like Cameron hated being seen more than being insulted. Across the room, Audrey stood near the entrance, had not known she was there. She must have heard enough. Her face was pale. Cameron noticed her too and immediately went to her. Their argument began quietly, then not quietly enough. You said you could help my family, Audrey whispered. Cameron said, I can, but things changed. You said Blake Capital was strong. It is. Ethan says. Ethan wants to make me look weak. Are you? That silenced him. Audrey's eyes filled. You told me he had nothing. Cameron looked furious. He didn't tell anyone he had Sterling. That isn't the same. He manipulated you. No, she said, voice shaking. You did. I did not stay to hear the rest. I had no desire to watch Audrey's second illusion collapse in real time. Outside the reception hall, Margaret Vale joined me. You dropped enough information in there to make Blake Capital's week difficult. I stated public risk conclusions. You stated them where the right people could hear. I looked at her. Is that a criticism? No, it is an observation. From legal, from someone who appreciates efficient pressure. The next morning, Blake Capital's East Harbor financing round stalled. 2 lenders requested updated risk disclosures. A partner bank delayed a credit extension. A real estate publication ran a cautious note about increased scrutiny around mid-tier private development groups. No one mentioned Sterling. They did not need to. Cameron texted from a new number. You arrogant bastard. Then, this isn't over. Then, an hour later, look, we should talk before things get worse. I sent the messages to Margaret. She replied, blocked and archived. Good advice. Audrey sent nothing for 3 days. Then one message arrived. Audrey, was any of it real? I looked at the message for a long time. I knew she meant Cameron, Blake Capital, the future she had chosen, but the question applied to us too. Was any of it real? I typed. Ask yourself why you only ask after the illusion stops benefiting you. then I deleted it. No response was cleaner. Audrey came to Sterling Tower on a rainy afternoon. She had no appointment. Security called my office. Audrey Hart is in the lobby. She says it is personal. I looked at the rain streaking the windows. For a moment, I saw another rainy night, my first death, headlights, wet highway. The phone screen glowing with Audrey's final thank you message. Then I looked at the calendar in front of me. Meetings, reports, a life that had continued. Send her to the visitor conference room, I said. Margaret looked up from the file beside me. Are you sure? No. Would you like me present? Yes. Audrey entered the visitor conference room 10 minutes later. No makeup today, or very little. Her eyes were red. She wore a dark coat, hair damp from rain, hands clasped in front of her like she was trying to hold herself together. Margaret sat near the wall with a legal pad, professionally invisible. Audrey looked at her, then at me. Does she have to be here? Yes. Pain crossed her face. You don't trust me at all now? No. At least she did not argue. She sat across from me. For a while, she only looked at her hands, then she whispered, I'm sorry. I waited. I'm sorry I ended the engagement in front of everyone. Better, I'm sorry I let Cameron stand beside me when I did it. Closer. I'm sorry I thought ending it would prove I had chosen a better future. There, I nodded once. Thank you for saying it clearly. Her eyes filled. That sentence hurt her. It should, she said. I didn't know who you were. I know. I mean, I knew you were connected to old family friends. I knew your grandfather mattered somehow. But I didn't know Sterling. I didn't know this. That is the problem. She looked up, because I would have chosen differently. Yes. Her lips trembled. I know how that sounds. It sounds accurate. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I thought I was choosing stability. No, you were choosing status. She flinched. I continued. Cameron looked richer, louder, more certain. His family hosted better parties. He had cars, watches, investors around him, people saying his name. I was quiet. So you decided I was smaller. Audrey covered her mouth. I was wrong. You were honest. She looked confused. Wrong about facts, honest about values. That landed harder. Margaret's pen moved softly on the pad. Audrey cried quietly. After a while, she said, my parents pressured me too. No, Cameron did too. I know. I felt trapped. No. Her head snapped up. I said, you felt tempted. That is different. Her face went white. You don't understand. I understand very well. You wanted me to be ordinary, so leaving me looked practical. You wanted Cameron to be powerful, so choosing him looked brave. You wanted the engagement to be a childish burden because that made breaking it look mature. Her tears fell faster. I leaned back. You were not trapped, Audrey. You were ambitious in the most cowardly way. She took that like a blow. For a moment, I thought she would leave. She did not. That was new. In the past, Audrey left when truth stopped flattering her. Now she sat there and absorbed it. I didn't mean to end us, she whispered. I almost laughed, not cruelly, from exhaustion. You brought legal papers to a public family event. I know. You placed them in my hands. I know. You said the childhood engagement was holding us back. I know. But you didn't mean to end us. She closed her eyes. I meant to end the obligation. I was silent. She opened her eyes again. I thought maybe, later, if things changed, if I became useful again. No, no, if I saw that I was wrong, and you saw that when. She could not answer, so I did. When Sterling made me visible. Her shoulders shook. Yes, that was the first fully honest answer. Good, painful, but good, she said. I don't want Cameron. That is no longer relevant. I broke things off with him. Good for you. I mean it. I believe you. Hope flickered. I killed it before it grew. But that does not create a path back to me. Her mouth trembled. Can't we start over? No, Ethan, no. What if I prove I've changed? Change without access to me. She stared at me. I continued. If you become better, good. If you learn to value people before they become profitable, good. If you rebuild your family without using someone else as a bridge, good. But none of that requires me. She bowed her head and cried. I loved you. I know. That surprised her. I said, you loved the version of me who belonged to you without costing you social ambition. Her tears stopped for half a second. You think that's all it was? No. I think it was more complicated than that, but not better. The room was silent except for rain against the window. Finally, Audrey whispered, if I had known you were Sterling, I wouldn't have signed. I looked at her. That is not love. She nodded slowly. I know now. Do you? I think so. No, you know regret. Love would have known before. She broke, not theatrically, quietly, her hands covered her face and her shoulders folded inward. I did not comfort her, that was the hardest part, not because I wanted her back, because for years, her tears had been instructions I obeyed automatically. Now I sat still and let her cry. After a while, she wiped her face. Will you ever forgive me? I don't know. Do you hate me? No. Her breath caught. I said, I'm grateful. She looked wounded. For what? For signing first. I didn't sign first. You did. You brought the papers. She understood. I stood. This meeting is over. She stood too quickly. Ethan, please, no. She followed me to the door. I don't want the engagement because of Sterling. I turned. You just said if you had known, you wouldn't have signed. She froze. That's not. It is exactly that. Her face crumpled. I opened the door. Goodbye, Audrey, she whispered. Is there really nothing left? I looked at her one last time. There is a signed release. Then I left. Behind me, Margaret stayed long enough to escort her out. That evening, Audrey knelt in front of the car as I left Sterling Tower. Security moved immediately, but I raised a hand to stop them from touching her unless necessary. Rain soaked her coat. She looked up at me through the open car window. Ethan, please. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I believed her. That did not change my answer. I said, you didn't just cancel an engagement, Audrey. She sobbed. You canceled the only chance you had to enter the Sterling family with dignity. The driver waited. I added, do not kneel for something you threw away standing. Then I closed the window. The car pulled away. In the side mirror, I saw her still kneeling in the rain until Sterling security gently guided her out of the driveway. My chest hurt, but my hands were steady. In my first life, I would have gotten out. This time, I kept moving. Sterling did not destroy the Hart family. That was important. People later said I ruined them. They were wrong. I simply stopped saving them. There is a difference. Hart Biotech's liquidity crisis worsened after Sterling declined to invest. Two other funds followed our lead and requested harsher terms. Vendors tightened payment schedules. A pending research partnership delayed commitment. Robert Hart tried to raise emergency financing through personal contacts. But the old confidence around his family had cracked. The Harts still had assets. They still had name, they still had options, but they no longer had the invisible protection of a future Sterling alliance. In my first life, I had been that protection. Quiet calls, soft introductions, a guarantee never written, only implied. This time, there was no implication. Blake Capital fell faster. The moment lenders began reviewing exposure, Cameron's family could not maintain the illusion. The East Harbor project entered restructuring talks. Their Phoenix development partner pulled back, too. Private investors demanded additional collateral. Cameron, of course, blamed everyone else. He blamed market conditions, he blamed lenders, he blamed his father, he blamed Audrey. Noah Reed, my old college friend and now one of the few people who knew enough to be viciously accurate, sent me a screenshot Cameron had posted and deleted. Loyalty is rare. Some people leave when things get hard. Noah wrote under it. Translation, Audrey is no longer financially useful. I did not respond, but he was right. Audrey saw Cameron clearly only after she lost what he wanted from her. That was late, but late sight is still sight. A week after Blake Capital's troubles became public, Audrey sent me one message. Audrey, you were right about him. I did not answer. She sent another. Audrey, you were right about me too. I still did not answer. Some truths do not require a reply. Meanwhile, my grandfather moved quickly. He announced my formal entry into Sterling's succession track at the next board session, not as a surprise. Heir from a fairy tale, as a controlled transfer. Ethan Sterling, grandson of Richard Sterling, would begin executive rotation across core divisions. My trust voting rights would activate in stages. I would chair a new strategic resilience initiative tied to infrastructure, logistics, and energy systems. The financial press loved the story. Sterling heir emerges after years outside public view. Richard Sterling begins succession process. Next generation steps into billion-dollar empire. They used photos of me entering headquarters. They used old speculation about my father. They used words like mysterious, disciplined, quiet, private. Audrey saw all of it. So did Cameron. So did every person in the Hart ballroom who had watched me sign away the engagement as if they were watching a poor boy lose his chance. Now they understood. The person who lost a chance that night was not me. At the Sterling board table, no one cared about my heartbreak. That was good. The board cared whether I understood leverage, risk, governance, capital allocation, and political exposure. They tested me brutally. One director asked whether my prior relationship with the Harts compromised my judgment. I answered, It did in the past, it does not now. Another asked whether declining heart biotech was personal. I answered, the numbers were insufficient, personal history made recusal worth considering. Which is why Legal and Investment Review documented the risk independently. Margaret Vale nodded. Another asked why the market should believe I was ready. I said, it shouldn't, not because of my name, it should judge performance. My grandfather watched from the head of the table, expression unreadable. Afterward, in his office, he poured tea for both of us. You did not overreach. Was that praise? It was an observation. Do not get sentimental. I took the cup. He looked toward the city. When your grandmother was alive, she used to say the hardest thing about inheritance is that everyone thinks it is receiving. It is mostly refusing. Refusing what? Flattery, panic, weak deals, emotional debts disguised as obligations, people who arrive late and call it loyalty. I thought of Audrey in the rain. Yes. Grandfather looked at me. She came to you. Yes. You were tempted. I did not answer. He did not need one. She was raised to be charming, he said, not evil. Charming people often believe regret should open doors. She cried. Of course, that doesn't make her wrong. No, her actions did that. I looked down at my tea. He continued, do not hate her. Hate makes people central. That line stayed with me. Do not hate her. Hate makes people central. So I did not hate Audrey. I let her move to the edge of my life, where people who once mattered but no longer had access belonged. By winter, Hart Biotech entered a structured recapitalization. Robert Hart stepped down as CEO. The family retained a reduced stake but lost control. Audrey's mother disappeared from society events for months. Audrey herself took a role in the restructuring foundation. Quieter than before, less polished, Blake Capital's fall was uglier. Cameron's father resigned under pressure. The family sold assets. Cameron's social life contracted. Men who had once clapped his back at clubs suddenly had meetings elsewhere. He tried to reinvent himself as a startup advisor, then a personal brand strategist, then an investor relations consultant. No one with real money trusted him. He cornered me once outside a private club. Security moved, but I told them to wait. Cameron looked thinner, still handsome, less bright. You happy? He demanded. No. You got everything? No. I returned to what was mine. He laughed bitterly. You think you're some hero because your grandfather owns half the city? No. Then what are you? I looked at him. The man you told her wasn't enough. His face twisted. You hid behind a fake name. I lived without a famous one. You set us up. No. You revealed yourselves. He stepped closer. If you had told her, I cut him off. If I had told her, she would have chosen differently for the wrong reason. Cameron's mouth shut. I continued, and you would still be exactly what you are. What's that? Overleveraged. His face went red. I walked past him. He shouted after me, Audrey still loves you. I stopped, not because the sentence touched me, because it deserved correction. I looked back. No, Audrey loves the door she closed. Then I left. 1 year after the engagement cancellation, Sterling Global held its annual strategy summit at the Metropolitan Club. I stood on stage under clean white light, presenting a $100 billion infrastructure allocation plan to board members, investors, division heads, and public sector partners. A year earlier, I had stood in the Hart Ballroom while people waited for me to collapse. Now those same circles watched me discuss ports, grid modernization, energy storage, data logistics, and long-term capital deployment. Life does not always give symmetry, but when it does, it can be ruthless. My grandfather sat in the front row, older, tireder, still sharp. When I finished, the applause was measured, professional, and worth more than any ballroom gossip. Margaret Vale leaned toward me afterward and said, you were concise. From her, that was a standing ovation. The summit reception began after the presentation. Had just finished speaking with a transportation commissioner when I saw Audrey across the room. She wore a simple black dress, no diamonds, no Cameron, no crowd around her. She had come with a non-profit delegation tied to the Hart Foundation's post-restructuring work. Her family's name still opened some doors, though fewer than before. She saw me and did not approach immediately. That was new. Old Audrey would have assumed history gave her permission. This Audrey waited until I was alone near the side gallery. Then she walked over. Ethan, Audrey. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. She seemed older, not by years, by consequence. I heard your presentation, she said. Thank you for coming. It was impressive. Thank you. She smiled faintly. I used to hate when you answered like that. Like what? Politely, without giving me anything to hold. I said nothing. She looked down. I deserved that. I still said nothing. The city glittered beyond the tall windows. A year ago, I would have measured this moment by how much it hurt. Now I measured it by how little I needed from her. Audrey took a breath. Can I ask you one question? You can ask. If I hadn't cancelled the engagement that night, would we still be together? I had expected it. Still, hearing it aloud closed something old. No. Her eyes filled, but she stayed still. I continued, maybe not that night, maybe not that month, but eventually, someone louder would have appeared, someone with a clearer title, brighter money, easier status, and you would have wondered whether I was beneath what you deserved. She swallowed. You're right, I know. No cruelty, just truth, she said. I thought I was choosing ambition. No, you were choosing appearance. Yes. She looked toward the reception hall, where sterling executives moved in small constellations of power. I didn't understand the difference then. You understand now? I think so. Good. Her lips trembled at the word. I deserved that too. Not everything is punishment, Audrey. She looked at me. Then what is it? Sometimes an answer is just an answer. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. I know. I'm sorry I made you feel small because I couldn't recognize quiet strength. I know. I'm sorry I treated the engagement like a burden when it was one of the greatest honors my family ever received. That one mattered, not because of Sterling, because she finally understood scale. I'm sorry I came back only after I saw what you were. I looked at her. That is the clearest apology you've made. Tears slipped down her face. Does it change anything? No. She closed her eyes. I know. A silence settled between us, not warm, not hostile. Finished? She asked. Do you hate me? No. Did you? For a while, and now, I'm grateful. She opened her eyes, pain crossed her face, but she did not look away. Because I signed, because you brought the papers. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. I thought I was freeing myself. You were freeing me, yes. She looked down at her hands. My father says that night was the moment everything turned. It was, for both families. For both people too. She nodded. I won't ask again, thank you. I hope you find someone who would have chosen Ethan Miller. I thought of the woman I had begun seeing months earlier, a policy advisor who had met me in a meeting where no one used my last name, challenged my assumptions, and told me my memo was brilliant but arrogant. She still preferred calling me Ethan, no surname attached. I said. Audrey's face changed, a soft sadness, then relief. I'm glad. I believed her. That was its own ending. She stepped back. Goodbye, Ethan. Goodbye, Audrey. She walked away through the reception crowd. This time, I did not watch until she disappeared. My grandfather approached a minute later, cane in hand, eyes on the space where she had gone. You handled that without stupidity. Your compliments are improving. Do not get used to it. I smiled. He looked at me. Do you understand now? What? The inheritance was never the money. I looked across the room at the people negotiating, laughing, building, calculating, risking, at the empire that had waited for me while I wasted years trying to be chosen by someone who could not read value without a famous name attached. Yes, I said. He nodded. Good. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I found the copy of the signed engagement release in my private file, had kept it, not out of sentiment, as evidence. I took it out and read the two signatures, Audrey Hart, Ethan Miller, two names ending a promise made before either of us understood what promises cost. For a long time, I thought she had ended our future. Now I knew she had ended the wrong future, the one where I kept shrinking so she could feel taller, the one where I delayed power to prove humility, the one where I mistook being needed for being loved. She thought she was canceling a childhood engagement. She did not know she was canceling her only dignified entrance into the Sterling family. She thought she was rejecting an ordinary man. She did not know she was releasing the heir to a billion-dollar empire from the last chain he had mistaken for love. The day I agreed to end it, I did not just let Audrey go, I let go of the man who had almost traded his inheritance, his dignity, and his future for the hope that someone would choose him before knowing what he was worth. In my first life, I begged her not to leave. In this one, I signed. Then I went home, not to the Harts, not to Cameron's shadow, not to the boy Audrey thought she was leaving behind. I went home to my name, my family, my empire, myself, and this time, I inherited all of it.